Hello there, reality bandits, pirates of the illusion, reprobates of the third dimension. This is the Reconsider Simon podcast. This is a strange, weird, and tiny space of the internet where we look deep into the void and all its woo-woo. This is podcast 16, and it's a particular type of podcast that I do every now and again, which is a journal-style podcast. So it's a varied patchwork of different ideas, inspirations that I've had, thoughts, musings, things that I've read, things that I've seen. So it's a real mixed bag of concepts. So in terms specifically what I'm going to be talking about today, initially I'm going to be delving back to the last podcast to do with time slips and a very strange spiritual attack that I had while I was actually editing the podcast itself. Also going to be looking into the sun, that big flaming ball of energy that you see in the sky every day. Going to be talking about the sun, some of the up and coming earth changes as well, and the ideas of a second sun. And also spiritually, just the idea of information coming through to do with a solar human. So there's that. Also, these last couple of weeks I've been walking in Wales, and just extraordinarily I've found links to do with King Arthur again, Glastonbury, plus quite close by to the same area, there's an event that was dubbed the Welsh at the time, happened in the 1970s. Specifically, it was called the Berwyn UFO. But I would argue is a more recent, quite powerful UFO sighting in 2016 called the Penrith, I think it is, UFO, which was this huge pyramid style ship that appeared in the sky. There was a few witnesses, and around about that whole scenario as it was unfolding, there was various military aircraft around. And after the event itself, I think for a few days afterwards, there were lots of authority figures around investigating. So that's another story for another day. And I've discovered a rather interesting new resource of information, and it's from a website called the British Newspaper Archive. This is a recent discovery for me. And this revolves around, it's a collation of basically all the local newspapers within United Kingdom around the country. And you can kind of log on, you can do keyword searches. So I've been delving quite deeply into finding various esoteric information from these various local newspapers from around the world. And it stretches all the way back to the sort of 18th, 17th century as well. So it's quite a breadth of information there. This is definitely a very new research tool, which I intend to use a lot more when I'm researching for various things that I'm doing. And finally, bringing it back to Chester, where I am at the moment. I'm sort of currently residing there. I bought a large map of the whole area of Chester, like an OS map, Ordnance Survey map, and I found quite a profound alignment of a ley line evolving some quite key architecture and sacred sites within Chester. I've done quite a lot of research on the internet, maybe information elsewhere in books that I'm not aware of, but I'm kind of thinking maybe this is a new discovery, so I'm going to be talking about that as well. Also, just a heads up, I've released a new article on my website, reconsidersimon.com, called Intense Times. And it's just really a cathartic piece of writing, just explaining some of the chaotic energies that are flying around at the moment and how maybe that's affecting everyone, personally, but then also on the global stage as well. Everything seems very chaotic at the moment. Right, let's start. So the first topic I'm going to be talking about is generally to do with like spiritual attacks, and more specifically, my previous podcast was called Time Slips. And that was probably recorded about 2-3 weeks ago now as I'm recording this. And it was just generally like exploring the area of people experiencing time slips where they may just fall into a different era for a period of time and then return back to the present time. And I was just overall looking at kind of cultural ideas to do with this whole theory. And I came across this 1970s British TV show that I'd never heard of before. It was happening in the 1970s called Stone Tape. I was just downloading an audio clip of this show on YouTube to basically, add it to the podcast itself. And I had my headphones on at the time. And part of the clip includes these scientists being in this very, very old building in this basically very bare stone room. And they experience this very strange paranormal event where they hear this woman screaming. And it's a really shrill scream. And it was strange, but I had my headphones on at the time when I was kind of listening to it. And there was something about this scream that immediately, something embedded in my heart straight away. Basically, in the show, this scream is some kind of recorded, quite high impact, violent incident that this woman endured. And for some reason, the stone within the building somehow has kind of recorded this event and just keeps replaying it. Hence why, the scientists can kind of hear this shrill scream. But when they've actually tried to record it as well on their audio devices, and it's not actually coming through. They can only hear it audibly through their ears. I really wanted to add this clip to the podcast to kind of give context to everything. But again, I was quite intimately tuned in with my headphones, and the volume was quite loud. And as soon as the screen kind of came in, I'm quite tuned in to stuff when it attacks me, and just something immediately bedded into my heart. It's really, really bizarre. So after that happened, I started to have real second thoughts. I was like, oh, maybe this isn't a good idea. I don't want the same thing to happen to you who's listening now. I don't want you to have the same experience. So I then decided to try and choose a different clip. So I kind of cut out the clip where you hear this woman scream, and I basically then instead chose the section of the clip where you have all these scientists kind of shouting. It's really over the top, really overly dramatically acted. I guess a lot of them are kind of stage actors. It's of its time, the 1970s. Everything's kind of really over the top. So their performances are quite overly emotional. So I kind of chose that clip. But overall, actually, I was just starting to think maybe this clip is a little bit cursed, and I sort of slightly regret actually releasing it now. But it really got me thinking about, what was happening with this audio. Where did they get it? What was the intention? And I think the whole idea of this TV show, that it was just a standalone film that was on British television, the BBC, I think. This experience really made me think about, I think it was in the late 1930s, you had War of the Worlds in America. It was a radio show, but they didn't say it was dramatized. It was this kind of pseudo news report of basically this alien invasion of America at the time. And a lot of people who were listening to it didn't realize it was fictitious, thought it was actually happening, it was actually rolling out. And people always point towards this experience as being some kind of strange psychological experiment by the authorities to kind of see how people react in that sort of situation. And I know, I remember when I was growing up, I think it was the late 1980s at some point, I was actually at my grandparents' house, and there was this really strange TV show on the television, and it was kind of styled to be this documentary, and they were investigating this haunted house, and it had a lot of general sort of presenters you would see in everyday television shows. And it had this family, or they were basically being, the whole life turned upside down by this kind of strange poltergeist. But it was actually quite disturbing because it was made to look like this live event, this kind of investigation. Turned out the whole thing was kind of fictitious, but they didn't tell you that at the time. And it was actually quite, scary. I remember the show ended, even my mum and my grandparents were just like, what the hell was that? Because they didn't realize, it was a drama. It wasn't real. It was very controversial at the time because after the show, there was quite a few people who just weren't aware of the fact that it was dramatized. I mean, we didn't realize it was dramatized. It felt so real, and it was quite scary. And I was quite a young child at the time as well. But various people committed suicide, and it's like, why would you do that? You know what you're going to do, unless it was some kind of strange psychological experiment, or for some kind of particular agenda that you want to traumatize people. There is precedent, I've heard before, in conspiracy land, where you get this quite horrific idea of people being tortured in some way and their screams being recorded, and then whatever organization is behind this then tries to transmit these horrific frequencies in a way that audibly you can't really hear it, to cause kind of mass distress, mass dissidence on purpose to people, to keep people in that fear state, and they don't realize why, because they're basically, hearing these strange frequencies on a very subconscious level. My thoughts towards the BBC now, where I was always quite pro it and quite liked it, and now really I find it quite a weird, strange organization, and the whole idea of existence is there to kind of educate, but actually now I sort of perceive it as being there to kind of misinform people and to sort of create this veil of illusion about what's happening and around them. And plus, if you kind of look towards some of the people that have been employed by the BBC, particularly their activities to do with children, and I think more of those truths are going to kind of come out. And, this show, Stone Tape, I would, really ask questions about this scream. Where did it come from? Is that a genuine scream, maybe someone being tortured? Or is it part of some kind of weird, strange occult ritual which they embedded to cause kind of dissidence across the United Kingdom? Because don't forget, this is back in the time, the 1970s. I think there were only 3 channels at the time. So some of these shows have like tens of millions of viewers because a lot of people are all watching the same thing. It's not like today where you have so many different media channels, people watching stuff on Netflix, people watching stuff on terrestrial television or satellite. It was a lot more of a consolidated audience back then. So it's quite impactful if you're kind of creating a show and you're doing weird psychological or occult experiments, then obviously it's going to affect a lot of people. I mean, overall, I don't really like horror films or horror TV shows. I tend to avoid it. The more kind of psychological horror, I don't mind. I always think The Exorcist is an amazing film, but it's not terribly gory. Um, it's a little bit disturbing, but it's not horrific. I mean, some of these films that you get now, the sort of new horror stuff like the Saw films or the Hostel, I would never watch that, and I don't understand the mentality of why people go to watch that sort of thing because it's just kind of horrific. It just goes to show like there's so many different weird ways that you can actually spiritually attacked. And it happened to me recently. I went to a conference I mentioned, Awake and Aware, just outside of Watford, and I stayed in this hotel. It's quite a cheap hotel, a travel lodge. And once I arrived there, it was quite late at night. It was really heavy energy. That night I got, spiritually attacked, and I was such in disarray. I didn't know what was going on. I just woken up and I could feel this like really horrific energy sort of coming in. And I just forgot all my clearing techniques. I just kind of woken up and I was a complete daze. And the whole weekend I sort of felt it. I didn't feel completely normal. I felt that constant anxiety from it. And it took for someone to really help me to clear. I mean, I have quite a lot of clearing techniques that usually are quite successful. But for whatever reason, I just could not clear this energy. And I was having these horrific dreams every night for about a week. I felt fine in the day, but it says at night time it was like Freddy Krueger. I was just being attacked again. And yeah, I had to call this psychic lady who helps with this sort of thing to kind of help me clear myself completely. So yeah, you can get spiritually attacked, or you can get attachments from locations. Sometimes when I go into the centre of Chester, it's quite an old place, and particularly if you go sort of on a Saturday at the weekend, there's just lots of people there. You can get attachments from people just walking around, and there's times I just forget to clear myself, and then that night I'll just get spiritually attacked. So it's a kind of constant thing for me as well. And there's also, what I was talking about there, obviously this is a strange clip from YouTube. It was just amazing that I had this kind of response, but there are so many different forms of electronic media where you can get attachments from. I think you can get it from pornography, and overall now I just don't look at pornographic sites anymore just because that particular reason. And I think there's something very, very strange going on with Pornhub anyway, trying to get people into more weird and weirder stuff. I've had it on Telegram as well. I remember the one time I was quite innocently looking for Telegram channels just to do with Brighton, the local area. And I just stumbled across this one group that actually openly sold recreational drugs. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize you can buy drugs on Telegram like that. And I was just kind of scrolling through just out of interest. But that night I had the most horrific, like distorted, horrible dreams. And I always put it down to that particular Telegram site that I was looking at. And it's not just like every day you always perceive maybe like you go into spiritual spaces or spiritual events, you'll be safe, but that's not the case either. I mean, I've been to really uber spiritual festivals, a mix of kind of yoga with movement spirituality, meditation, a really, really hippie event. We did like a cacao ceremony, and kirtan, which I'd never really been to before, was this kind of strange, like Hindu-esque thing where basically people sing along and they sort of sing in mantras and stuff. And at the end of the whole festival, they had this thing called the fire ceremony. It happened really early in the morning. It was about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And the people I was with, like friends at the time, they were really into this stuff. And they said, you should come along. It's really good. It's really powerful. And at the time, it felt really nice and energetic. I didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of strange sort of chanting in I don't know what language it was. It was very sort of Indian themed. But the week after that festival, I just kept having these really horrific dreams, but it was all like Indian themed. It was like in India. And so it was obviously something attached from this kind of spiritual experience had latched onto me. And that was now attacking me in my sleep, the week after. And it can also happen in, mass meditations. I've spoken about in this podcast before. I went to Contact in the Desert in America, is California, the first big UFO conference I ever went to, and it was actually properly in the desert. It's now in a hotel these days. But they had this kind of mass meditation. It was like a CE5 event where you calling UFOs, and some UFOs did come in, not a lot, but there was a lot of people meditating all together. And it was, at the time, I was like really high vibrational because I hadn't been drinking any caffeine or alcohol. I was vegan at the time. So, I was really buzzing. I was really able to sort of see energy in the sky. It was quite incredible. And at the time when I was meditating, it was really bizarre because I kept everyone's intrusive thoughts are like coming into my head. So I was kind of dealing with that. It was quite bizarre. I was getting these flashes of visualizations from other people, but I was very aware this very strange dark energy kind of descended on the group itself as well. And after the meditation ended, everyone kind of went about their, evening. I went back to my tent. I just felt this really dark energy follow me back to the tent. I was really, really freaked out at the time. And I think back then I didn't really have too many clearing techniques at the time. So I just kind of accepted what was happening. Anyway, I went back into my tent, quite, scared. And I just went to sleep. And I woke up the next day in the tent. I'd never felt so depleted of energy and so depressed in all my life. It was like something had just drained me that night of all my energy. I think that was the first, having like a spiritual attachment from a scream. I've had it through audio before, but not like that. And, this is just someone's uploaded the clip to kind of YouTube, and it's still embedded in this sound in some way. And I guess, we can kind of connect to these portals in so many different ways. It could be film, it could be art, it could be through people, it could be a location. But if your defenses are down for some reason, or you're in a quite low vibrational state, but I think even if you're quite high vibrational, you still can get attachments. And it's just I'm constantly clearing all the time. In my meditation in the morning, I'm clearing. And if I feel weird in the afternoon, I'm clearing as well. Sometimes I forget and I can walk around for like 2 hours and I'm feeling all this anxiety. And I was like, you know what? You haven't cleared yourself yet. And I'll sit down, I'll do my techniques and it kind of goes away. So it's like a constant battle all the time. And it's strange when I get these really obvious attacks or these feelings like, oh, something's coming into my field, it's sucking my energy. This is why I'm feeling like this. I have thought, what the hell do these things look like? And there has been times actually when I get these like flashes of it. And there was one time, when I was living in Ditchling, that sort of village outside of Brighton, I've spoken about it on previous podcasts. I was living in this flat that turned out to be quite haunted. Overall, I was actually really, really happy then. I had to move out at the time. I moved to a different flat further up the road, only because the landlord wanted to sell the property. But I was having a lot of strange experiences, like kind of lights going on and off, blowing all the time. At night time, I was having quite horrific dreams. I was getting attacked at night all the time. And I remember at one point I had this like flash of this huge spidery being. It was all angular limbs, and they looked really, really horrific. So maybe it's good for our own like well-being and like general mental well-being that we don't see what these entities look like, because it could be really horrific if you're sort of seeing this stuff flying around all the time. And that actually got me thinking, as I was kind of researching this podcast, what I was going to talk about. There's a story about during the Vietnam War when they were introducing night vision technology. And now when you see night vision, footage, it's kind of green. It's like got a green light to it. But the original iteration of night vision, it was actually red, and it was kind of embedded in goggles, and it was given to pilots like helicopter pilots and fighter jet pilots, etc. But actually, this new sort of night vision technology, what was happening? They were able to see like demon type creatures and gargoyles. So when they were flying around at night on these various missions, these pilots were getting freaked out because they were seeing these creatures that you just don't see in nighttime or in the daytime. They're able to see this other layer, this demon layer, these creatures sort of flying around. Now, I found quite a good sort of succinct clip on the internet, and it's from the Unfiltered podcast. So I'm going to play that for you now.
I just found something out. I don't know. Okay. I'm just going to say it.
Uh-oh.
You know night vision goggles?
Yes.
How they're like green. Now they have like the white phosphor, which is like whitish blue. But apparently the first night vision goggles that the U.S. government had during Vietnam were red. And basically these goggles were made with a chemical, cyanosine or something. They were given to fighter pilots, people in planes, and different parts of the military during Vietnam. And the soldiers were wearing them and they were seeing things. The gunner was like shooting in the air at nothing. What do you see right now? And he's like, how do you not see this? They're like giant demons flying beside us. And they're like, what are you talking about? Apparently the chemical that was in this allowed them to see on like some different visible spectrum or something, and they were picking up auras and
like the fourth dimension
energy, and people were losing their mind and going crazy because they were seeing.
Whoa.
And they banned them, and the army was like, do not put these on. There's something really wrong with it.
Bring it back. Let's fucking wear them.
Yeah, go to Coachella.
Crazy. And then right after that they stopped and they made the switch to green.
There you go. There's also another individual called Cliff High. Many of you might be aware of him. He's quite famous for predicting the future. He has some kind of monitoring software that monitors the internet, and he can kind of pick up on the overall consciousness of the hive mind of the internet and everyone. And he can kind of predict certain high impact events that are going to happen in the future due to the sort of chatter that happens on the internet. It's really fascinating. I don't know exactly know how it works, but he predicted like 15 years ago, the recent Joe Rogan and Trump podcast. I mean, he predicted that 15 years ago, along with other things as well. But yeah, it's just basically a brief introduction to who he is. But he was discussing on an interview about how his dad was also involved in this situation with this night goggle vision technology in the Vietnam War. So I'm going to play that for you now.
The CIA does this stuff all the time. My dad, so after my dad got back, he was the military governor of Pleiku. When he got back in '69, we had CIA drop by, and he had a lot of interaction with CIA, as you may imagine. And they would drop by occasionally. And us kids, everybody was forbidden to be around when they came on over. My mother would leave dinner on the table and then we would leave. But I would sneak back and listen. And those CIA guys had some really screwy ideas. And my dad would always get us out of the room saying, murderers coming to dinner. And so we'd all leave, you know, because these are all bloodied officers.
Can you offer one of those screwy ideas? Can you?
Well, okay. So remember the red goggles?
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the red goggles.
Okay. So the CIA officer comes on in and they're having dinner, and then he starts talking about this experiment. And my dad basically said, because, you know, my dad was running it. He didn't know the CIA knew that he was running it, right? But of course, CIA knows a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so he was asking, and then this was like maybe 30 or 40 minutes after dinner, another CIA guy came on over, and I got beers in beer steins and took them into my dad and the CIA guys. So I heard a little bit more at that point. These guys were discussing the red goggles and the next evolution of them. Okay, because they were wanted to know if my father's experience with his troops in the 101st Airborne after the goggles had been introduced to the helicopter pilots resulted in any of these individuals having the following things happen to them. And there was a long laundry list. So this was like a sort of a social, but not really visit, right?
Wait a minute, so you mean after they quit using the goggles, the people that had tried them on still had issues?
2 years on, basically 2 years on, because they introduced the goggles the year before my dad got in there, and then they redid it with my dad's group, the 101st Airborne. And so 2 years after that, they were there querying, almost 2 years, maybe 18 months or something, querying my dad about his experiences with people that had that happen to him. And so, and it was a long laundry list of what we might think of as mental effects from that. Continuing.
I just always thought it was PTSD, but do you think it was more than that?
Yeah. For these guys, yeah. Because they saw a level of the fabric of reality that they should not see. Okay, now I've seen that stuff, but I knew why I was seeing it because I took a drug deliberately to do that.
Did you see this beings with the wings?
No. No, so I didn't. Okay, so psychedelics are not like that, right? So
Okay.
psychedelics disturb your vision with hallucinations where the little dots in the screen become much more apparent and they seem to move and this kind of stuff. And then that's usually what most people encounter are hallucinations at that level. I would blast right through that. I would take shamanic levels in which you literally feel as though you are dying. Every fabric of your being is being shredded into universe, and you lie there absolutely convinced you've just died. So we're not talking recreational levels, right? My mind was seriously disturbed by schizophrenia, and I was going to kill myself or cure myself. I killed myself and cured myself.
Wow. But these guys were seeing the thing you were talking, the thing that I heard said about the red goggles were that when they looked out, like the gunner, the door gunner or something would look out at the jungle, he'd see these beings on
gargoyles, big wings, claws,
moving and
eyes,
jumping,
the whole damn things. Yeah,
right.
my dad brought home sketches that kids that were artists made after looking at through the goggles. Scare the absolute shit out of you.
And he said that, and I heard that when they first looked at these things, the things looked back at them.
That's what
I guess I'm asking you is that when they got done with the goggles, were they still having these things look at them? I mean,
no. The effects that they had were like after a really bad acid trip or something. You can't reintegrate your personality. Occasionally, you'll see out of the corner of your eye something flit by. You're obviously perceiving things through the doors of perception. So see, this
but they're not, that once they take the goggles off, they're not able to see beyond normal.
Correct. So now this is the thing.
Right there.
Right. So my understanding of what the CIA was, and so I was, a young adult, maybe I was 16 or so. Then I'd have to really think about the second time that he came in this long discussion. But so my understanding of it was that the CIA was interested in these things as a mechanical door to perception because they'd had too much trouble trying to do acid trips to people in order to achieve hyperspace. Okay, that was their goal.
Their goal was hyperspace.
Right, and in trying to create hyperspace, they came across this technology that they adapted into these goggles, thinking that it would give these guys the ability to see at night, the night vision goggles, which it does. You see everything in red. Problem is, you also see this other stuff that you shouldn't see, right? And if you see in green, you don't see the other stuff. We have so few red cones relative to green cones, they should have known this going in. But anyway, so what they were interested in was a technological device that wouldn't tie up somebody for months. So they didn't describe this to my dad this way, but this is my understanding that they were after something that they would be able to put onto a person. They could pop into hyperspace, do a deal with someone, get some knowledge, come back, take the device off, and return to normal to where they could talk to regular people.
Not be psychotic from the event.
Correct.
Wow.
And so here's their problem. The goggles and stuff were one approach. They tried electrical zapping of brains. Who knows how many people they destroyed or killed. And they were seriously involved in psychedelic drugs, all kinds. But they were into synthetics. They were into the T-cal and the Phe-cal approach, right? Of making phenylamines and, phenylamines known and loved, right? So they were into those level of drugs, and they did not understand, in my opinion, that those are like extracts. And so you get a real pure flavor out of them, but you need the other things that you would think are part of the organic complex in order to actually have the technology to get you to hyperspace. So most of these things, the phenylamines, triethylamines, and so on, are just like DMT. Pow, you're right through there. You're not there long enough to do anything. In order to do that, you got to go the shamanic route. Mescaline and psilocybin, in my opinion, are the best. There may be others. Ibogaine, that's a real heavy one. That's a 2-week journey.
So there you go. It does feel like sometimes our reality is some sort of crazy house of horrors. It's just insane. And again, maybe it's a good idea we don't see this demonic layer overlay in terms of what happens around us, because we could just go completely nuts. But please don't have nightmares about this, because I think, you know, overall we're more powerful than them, whatever they are. And I think there are so many different clearing techniques that you can kind of learn and sort of get to grips with, and it just really helps. And if there is something really sticky that you can't get rid of, there's loads of facilitators and therapists out there that can kind of help you clear this stuff as well. And one really powerful way to really clear, you know, dank sort of sticky energies is to go out in the sun and, you know, enjoy the outdoors, be in nature. That definitely helps. And this brings me on to the next subject of the sun, that big fiery ball of energy you see in the sky in the daytime. Sometimes we see that in the UK. This over this weekend, it's actually been quite nice in the mornings, but in the afternoon, overall, it clouds over again. It's all muggy and grey as it usually is. But I've been having a lot of synchronicities to do with the sun recently, and actually become very fond and have real affinity with it now as well. I always remember the early years of my life where I didn't really like direct sunlight. I didn't like the feeling of the sun on my skin. And now I'm completely converted. I like the idea of sunbathing. I think there's a loads of health benefits to being out in direct sunlight on your skin. I think a lot of the health messages surrounding the sun are kind of to do with fear and to maybe push you away from developing spiritually and physically, because there's this whole idea about how sunlight may be aiding humanity's evolution in some way, in the fact that it upgrades our DNA. I wrote a whole piece on this, the war on the sun. It's an article on my website, reconsidersimon.com, which you can read. And yeah, I just think there's a whole messaging surrounding the sun. There's a lot of fear to do with skin cancers, and then also to do with climate change as well. There's a whole narrative around that, and it's all sort of demonizing sunlight. And from my point of view now, from being a conspiracy theorist, I think, you know, when you get these overarching big grand narratives, for me, there's obviously big questions about why they're pushing this so much. And, you know, I've always been on the fence about that whole idea to do with like the sun upgrading DNA. There's no way I could really prove that. But more and more, I'm sort of coming round to that idea. I think the sun's actually really quite powerful energy for the overall development of spiritually of humanity. I think it's really bringing up the shadow within us personally, and also on a collective scale as well. All this craziness, I think, is from this extra energy that's coming from the sun. It's kind of creating this chaos. It's making us see the shadow of society, but the shadow within ourselves as well. I think in the mainstream and overall society, there's just a lot going on with the sun, which they're not telling you about. You may be aware of this channel already, but Suspicious Observers, I occasionally dip in every now and again. He's a really good like repository of knowledge to do with the sun's activity. He does like daily space weather reports. But he released a video recently to do with the weakening Earth's magnetic field and what that means. Because, you know, a lot of us have been experiencing the northern lights in various different parts of the country in the UK, where ordinarily you would never see them. I mean, people, I keep missing it, unfortunately, but I've even known people post up pictures in Brighton of people seeing the northern lights. And overall, the United Kingdom, if you're going to see the northern lights, it would be very, very occasionally, you know, in the right northern areas of Scotland, in the Highlands, where there's like no kind of light pollution. But you know, in the UK, twice this year, people have had this humongous, beautiful spectacles of these northern lights in the sky, and that's incredibly unusual. And the reason why, according to Suspicious Observers, is due to the Earth's magnetic field and how weak it is.
Hey everyone, it was really great to see so many posts about the aurora this week. Awesome you guys got to see it, and for many of you it was the second time this year after basically never having seen them before. But not too many people are asking, why all of a sudden are we seeing them so well? You may have heard that it is sunspot maximum. True, but that happens every 11 years. Yes, we had a solar flare release a CME at Earth, but that has happened hundreds of times in just the last decade. This one was big, but not that big. So why have we had these auroral sightings this year, now, when much bigger events have hit us in the past and went largely unnoticed? Well, apart from the solar activity, the main factor in the production of aurora is Earth's magnetic field, and it has been weakening. You may have heard we are in the beginning stages of a magnetic pole shift. a rapid one. The magnetic poles are moving. The overall magnetic protection of our Earth is fading, which is why these recent solar events are producing much more aurora than would normally be expected. These magnetic pole shifts are also called geomagnetic excursions, and they happen cyclically on our planet. This last week, we saw aurora in Florida. That is extremely rare, and this solar storm didn't even hit the highest storm levels. Aurora was seen at the Mexico border. Wild. Aurora in the tropics? Cuba, Puerto Rico. Absolutely ridiculous, especially for a solar storm that didn't hit level 5. Let's do a bit of background on these magnetic pole shifts, shall we? About 6,000 years ago, we had a magnetic pole shift, a mini excursion like this with Earth's magnetic field. It was called the Tianqi event. 12,000 years ago, it was Gothenburg. 18,000 years ago, it was Helena Pali. 24,000 years ago, it was Lake Mungo. You guys seeing a pattern? We know of several others in the last 100,000 years, including Mono Lake, Le Champ, and the Vostok event, all within the last 60,000 years. Essentially, we have this magnetic excursion on Earth about every 6,000 years. It has been 6,000 years since the last one, and it is already starting to happen again. Based on the speed of the changes, we're looking at about the 2040s for a full magnetic pole shift peak of the event. Now, if it was just about pretty lights in the sky, I would say, who cares? But it's not. During these events, the weaker magnetic field of Earth allows extra ozone depletion. It changes the jet streams. It allows more cosmic radiation to enter the atmosphere, and it disrupts animal navigation that relies on Earth's magnetic field. That's why the studies identify these magnetic shifts as being extremely dangerous, extinction-inducing events for many species. And now, on top of all of that, humans have an electrified way of life we rely on, and that's at greater risk due to solar activity as well. Imagine that while the atmosphere is changing and radiation is surging and the food chain is taking hits like Jenga, we lose power, heating, water purification, and distribution. No internet, no cell phones, no banks, no ATMs, no gas stations, no refrigeration of food. That's why this matters. As we said, it is due in time right now in the cycle. It is already begun. And we're seeing the early signs that our planet is in a shields down situation with these above average auroral sightings. Follow here for much more, including daily updates on the sun, Earth, relevant science, and of course the magnetic pole shift. Be safe, everyone.
I mean, previously, I always kind of heard ideas of this link towards, the sun's activity and how it might help humanity develop sort of spiritually. But I'm going to talk about in a minute more in terms of like what solidified this concept in my mind of like, actually, this is an actual thing. Because I've had sort of quite deep personal experiences during meditation, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. But it does appear the sun is getting more and more intense due to the weakening of the magnetic field. And there has been people spoken about before about how the sun used to be a lot more yellow in color. And I can't really remember this. I was born in sort of 1980s. So they're talking like the 60s, 70s and before. People have this more of a kind of yellowish hue to the sun. Like now, if you look at it, it's this really quite piercing white color. And, to be honest with you, I have found as well that the sun does burn my skin a lot quicker. And I am quite fair skinned. So I do, at the beginning, if I go in the sun, I have to be kind of quite careful with my time, the fact I don't burn myself. I subscribe to this podcast called Crow 777, and it's headed up by two guys, one called Jason, and the main guy is actually called Crow. I don't know him by any other name, but yeah, anyway, so they tend to cover quite a breadth of different knowledge. And a lot of the time, sometimes they interview people, but also they just, research specific topics and then, talk amongst each other about these topics. But also this guy Crow's done a lot of research to do with filming celestial bodies in the sky. And he has a range of various kind of, publicly available high power cameras. And he's filmed the moon, he's filmed the sun and other sort of planetary bodies. And he discovered this really strange thing called the lunar wave. And what he found when he zoomed right close into the moon, he would see this really strange wave distortion that would just like, fade over the moon itself. And he was like, that's strange. And he would try a different camera and he'd get exactly the same effect, this strange kind of digital wave, just like fan across the moon itself. And what he discovered, that other people got exactly the same, effect. They were replicating the same effect in a different part of the world, using different camera equipment. They were getting this same lunar wave. And what that means, I don't know. It could, my imagination runs wild. It's some kind of like projection that we're seeing of the moon, and that's just some kind of digital distortion that you see when you zoom in. I don't know. It just goes to show how much have we been lied to about our environment. We have all these images you see of the moon and space and what the earth is like and what space is. How much can we trust this? This is some of these big questions we're going to have to really tackle, I think. But there's also another aspect to his work. He did a lot of filming, close filming of the sun as well. I think he discovered this quite a number of years ago, but just sat on it because it was so out there. He just wasn't sure what to do with it. I'm going to play a clip for you now. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you're not going to see it visually. So I do suggest you look in the description notes. I'll put a link to this video so you can kind of watch it on YouTube yourself. But it basically details, it just seems like there's a second sun in the sky.
Here is confirmation of the double sun by another individual. First footage you're going to see here is my footage. Hydrogen alpha scope with a double stack, a solar max. That is the sun you see with your eyes. Okay, I'm going to pan around here. And that's lens flare, legitimate lens flare that you're seeing there. There's the sun you see with your eyes. And in a second here, I need to go the other way. There's lens flare. There we go. Watch the top. You'll see a little thing go by. This is the first time in the spring of 2016 that I discovered the double sun. There's the sun we see with our eyes. I'm still scanning around. I'm going to scan back over and find the other object for the first time. There it is, top of frame. This is the sun we do not see with our eyes. Now, I was afraid to post this for a long time. You're going to see that it will blur out. I'll mess with focus. I put a huge wrapping paper tube over the end of the Solar Max scope. When you see the disturbance over the face of this, that's what's going on. I'm trying to prove that this isn't lens flare, but all those there, right there. I also take my hand and I do light blocking over the end of the scope, which ironically, the gentleman who I'm about to introduce to you, who you should all go sub, saw this footage way back in 2016, and he replicated what I did, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, which is proof positive. Another individual doing it. Scanning back, there's a little bit of lens flare. There's the real sun that we see with our eyes in the bottom of frame, coming back into frame. Now I'm going to load another clip that I shot. I think I did this 3 or 4 days in a row, coming back to try to confirm this. Now here's a new clip. There's the sun you see with your eyes. That is legitimate lens flare right there. Scan out. There's the sun we don't see with our eyes on a new day. I'm confirming it once again. In a minute here, I'm going to load footage from a gentleman called Chris Van Meter, who took out equipment and replicated exactly what I did here, which is proof in the pudding. But he did something more. In one of the clips, you're going to see a telephone line going in front of the sun we do not see, which is also proof in itself. Again, there's the sun we see. Here comes Chris's footage. There's the name of his channel. You should all go up and sub him. There's the sun we see with our eyes. And there's the sun we do not. That noise is because this is a rip of a rip. We'll have better footage of this as we move along. But there is this, he is confirming in the same spot, in the same year, in spring, what I did. Here comes another clip by Chris on a new day. There is the sun we do not see with our eyes with a telephone wire in his field of view. When he scans back over to the regular sun, it's not there. There's the sun we see with our eyes. And again, we're back to my footage here. There's the sun we see. There's the sun we do not see without a Hydra alpha scope with a double stack or a full spectrum camera. I will say that it is my contention this second object can be detected in visual spectrum with just normal tools at sunrise and sunset. Here comes the sun we see. So as we warm up here, I'm going to be pairing off with some people to do more work on the sun here. But there it is, man. There is another object there. Might well be the source of the sun that we see. And since I have stated the moon is plasma, it could also be the cause for that. There it is, man. Crow Discovery Project. Cheers.
If you watch the video, you'll be able to hear and see the fact that he does really test to make sure that it's not some kind of reflection or some kind of optical illusion, that there is an actual body that he's actually filming. And again, he's repeated this numerous times. Every time he gets his high power camera out, looks at the sun, he sees this second sun very dimly in the background. I mean, he can't tell you what it is, exactly. All he can do is just convey that that's what he's seeing. I don't have a clue. I don't think anyone does. I mean, it just kind of goes to show potentially how deep some of these misconceptions are. These lies are so deep. And maybe there is a completely reasonable explanation why this is happening, and why you can kind of see this sort of weird second sun in the background. Really bizarre. So that's the second sun. But now I just want to link back to that idea, the sun being linked in some way to our spirituality, to our healing. The reason why, times at the moment can be quite chaotic. And this again links back to my article that I released on my website, reconsidersimon.com, called Intense Times. And I was talking about this particular subject. And the reason why I'm starting to think that this is an absolute definite thing is because during my meditations, I've been really finding myself being able to connect to energy a lot more. I don't know about you, but some of my talents seem to be increasing in some way. I don't know if it's going to be like this forever, but recently I've really started to feel the energy of things like people, places. They're really starting to ramp up. And so I've been having these meditations and I've been trying to connect with the sun, the idea of this central fiery ball of light in our solar system that gives us light. But I think it's an allegory that there's suns that are everywhere. You have the sun of our solar system. I think there's an internal sun within our body. I think sometimes I view that with, being inside my stomach in some way. I think there's an internal sun to the earth. I think there are suns to all these celestial bodies, the idea of a fractal universe. It feels also as like a hierarchy. I mean, there's not really a hierarchy spiritually, but it just feels at different levels. So, sun within ourselves and a sun within our solar system, sun within the earth. But I also see it overarching mega galactic sun. And what I've been doing, when I've been meditating, I just started to energetically connect with these suns to feel what it felt like. And I felt, with the normal sun in the sky, I was connecting with that. And it was just a lot of fiery, hot energy. It actually increased my body temperature. And I could really feel it, the sort of bottom half of my body, my root chakra and my sacral chakra. It felt really, really pleasurable. Granted, I know it sounds a bit nuts, but I've also been connected with, the sun within my own body, just sort of feeling that energy, what it feels like. And then also the earth. And I know there's a lot of mainstream scientific information which kind of basically spells out exactly what's, in the center of the earth, but I question that. And also some of these ideas to do with like inner earth civilizations, are they gathering energy from some kind of internal sun mechanism which gives them light and heat? I don't know, I'm just speculating, but when I feel energetically, it feels like there's some kind of internal sun to the earth. And of course in astrology is that like broader concept of a galactic sun where you have, the whole of space moving around, like our solar system is gathering closer and closer to the galactic sun. And this is again why spiritually, why energetically, everything's kind of changing around us. And I've been trying to connect energetically with this mega galactic sun as well. And it's a very different energy. Again, it was when you could try yourself, you can try connecting with these like celestial bodies and just see what the energy feels like in your body. And for me, that kind of mega galactic sun, it's not really heat. It's just more of the sort of top part of my body, very, very heart centered, very loving. It's again, very pleasurable to kind of feel into it. It really has. I mean, I haven't really pinned down these ideas, but it's really sort of redefining my idea of what God is, what God source creator energy is, and whether it's sort of maybe this source energy is being emitted through the celestial bodies in some way, like there's some kind of portal. I don't know how high this goes because I have tried to feel energetically, beyond what this mega galactic sun is. And I hit this kind of barrier. I don't know what that is. It's just, again, I'm just feeling energetically into it. It's not really visualizing so much, more about the energy of it. But that's what it feels like to me. So during the meditations, generally I'd try to meditate in the morning when I get up in the morning. I was just sort of feeling into these energies of the sun, what that feels like, what the mega galactic sun feels like. And actually, it felt great at the time, but later on in the day, I just really started to feel really weird. I felt all these like core wounds coming up to the surface, all of these shadow aspects, inner child trauma just coming up. It was actually really, really intense to deal with. I was like, what the hell is happening? Initially I didn't really link the two things, the fact that I've been meditating on the sun's energy, and maybe this is something to do with why I'm feeling like this. Again, I felt really triggery, just all of these like negative thought, all this stuff was kind of coming up, my shadow was coming up for me to look at. Then I just had to sit down, I had to sort of journal it. I had various kind of clearing techniques and inner child healing stuff, and I kind of wrote it down, and I felt loads better. And then I decided, actually, maybe I don't want to, because I have to work, I have to do various bits and bobs and be productive, and I can't be feeling like this in the daytime. And so I decided to kind of stop doing that and just basically just concentrated on feeling my own internal sun rather than connecting these larger celestial bodies of the main sun of the solar system or the mega galactic sun. I kind of stopped. And then I thought I'd test again. So I kind of went back to doing it. So I felt into the sun, felt into the mega sun, and literally hour, 2 hours later, I had exactly the same effect. Just all of these kind of triggery emotions coming up, inner child stuff, trauma, stuff I hadn't thought about for years, just all coming up. So this experience, very visceral experience, I mean, I'm never 100% on anything, who knows really what the core truths are. I think we're all trying to figure these things out. Whether we'll get to that point, I don't know. But the whole idea of the sun's energy, what it means, I'm more and more 100% sold on the idea that this solar energy, particularly maybe the mega galactic sun, is really individually and collectively for the whole of humanity, making us deal with our shadows. Is why, the wider world seems so chaotic. It's a reflection of what's going internally on inside us. Previously, I was always, it's a bit of a hippie idea. I don't think I really truly believe that, but due to these recent experiences, and every time I go back to it, it's the same thing. I give it time, I feel all right. I meditate again on these celestial bodies, and just like all these core wounds come up. I'm just circling back to that whole suspicious observers video, and he's talking about the reduced magnetic field and how, now we're being buffered more and more these cosmic energies. And again, personally, I think that's why people are feeling so untethered and so chaotic, because we're having to deal with these new energies coming in. And I think in some way, the Earth's magnetic field sort of does shield us a little bit from it. And what I realized what I was doing, through meditation, I was just bypassing all of those fields. I was just going right direct to the source. I was feeling those cosmic energies. And as a result, I was just getting that, real kind of shadow stuff coming up from within my psyche. These explorations during my meditation and the resulting, experiences I had been pretty profound, because it really just solidified in my mind, what this sun's energy means to me, but then also just the wider collective as well. During this podcast, I always like to reference larger cultural things in terms within film or TV shows or books. So I think sometimes these esoteric ideas are floating around within narrative or story and stuff. And, more recently, I've been speaking quite a lot about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And, there's a particular event in the film, one of the main characters, Roy, he has this big UFO contact experience. He gets sunburnt by the bright lights. But afterwards, he's receiving these telepathic kind of visual communications where he keeps visualizing this mountain. He's trying to why do I keep seeing this mountain? And he's making it his mashed potato. In the end, he goes completely nuts and he just builds this humongous replica of this mountain in his living room. And people are having similar experiences. Another main character, a lady in it, she's kind of drawing and painting these exact same visualizations of this mountain. It's like this telepathic communication from these beings, just basically telling these select few people to this is the location we're going to be. Please be there because we want to make contact with you. Now, I'm just sort of thinking recently about what is this obsession I've had with the sun recently, and it really happened probably about 2 years ago. I started to visualize just this idea of a round ball in the sky, and like Roy, weirdly, I don't know where this was coming from, I just was really enjoying just drawing different types of round celestial bodies. It could be quite simple pencil drawing. I was painting, even started to sew it. Actually, I bought loads of brightly colored kind of fabric, and I had this idea that I was going to do design this big drape with a big sort of yellow sun in the middle. And I was just really drawn to that visualization. It's really starting to make sense now. So you may be listening to this and thinking he's gone completely potty. You could be right, I don't know. But yeah, there's this thread that I've just become quite enamored by the sun. And it really just happened, I think, also harking back to the visualizations of the sun, but also just during that lockdown period as well, all those years ago. What was that, like 2020? I just started to see how crystalline the sunlight could be, because we didn't have any airplanes with all the kind of the chemtrails and all the rest of it. And just the light was just so perfect. And it was just every day, it was just brilliant blue skies and sun all the time. And it just kind of went to show, to me anyway, like how much maybe our environment is artificially engineered in some way to prevent us having that connection to the sun. On that subject, I mean, now we're going to go quite esoterically spiritual, so strap in. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, I don't know. But there's a lady called, I'm going to butcher her name now, called Honovi Strongdeer. Now, randomly, I think I first was aware of her at Contacts in the Desert. One of the second ones I went to, I think when it was actually in this big hotel, I saw her there. And then maybe the year after, I went to another conference in Barcelona, another UFO conference, and she was there. I think we visually recognized each other at the time and sort of said hello. And then I saw her a third time when I went back to, I think I've been 3 times now to Contact. So the third time I went to Contacts in the Desert in California, she was there again. And I think I managed to sort of find her on Facebook and sort of liked her group, and I've always generally quite enjoyed her perspectives. She's originally from the United Kingdom, I think, but now lives in Peru. So she's quite involved in sort of South American spirituality, like shamanism and sort of the Incas. I think she lives quite close to sort of some of the sacred sites around there. Many years ago, when I wasn't spiritual at all, when I was there with my girlfriend, we went traveling around Peru, and it was amazing, but I wasn't really truly kind of tuned into the whole consciousness and spirituality thing. So it was a nice sort of holiday, but yeah, it wasn't really sort of deeply profound for me on the spiritual level at that particular point. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, what was quite profound is that I've had lots of, these ideas to do with the sun, the energy, and just recently she started to post up some of the stuff to do with her perspective on what she's calling the solar age and human evolution. And yeah, I think she's getting a lot of this information from her guides. She has various guides which she sort of tunes into telepathically. I don't quite know the mechanics of it. I've seen some of her videos before, but I can't really remember. But it's just some of the information that she's posted about really resonated. So I'm going to read one of her posts to you now. The solar age is a new era of human evolution, where individuals are awakening to their true solar nature. It's a time of rapid growth, innovation, and advanced spiritual evolution. It's an age of transformation where humanity is shifting from a 3D density-based experience to a 5D, light-based reality and beyond. This process goes by many names. Ascension and expansion into light body are other names it is known by. In the solar age, humans are reconnecting with their solar essence to varying degrees and tapping into the infinite power and wisdom of our star, the sun. This connection is awakening new abilities and allowing individuals to embody their highest potential. The solar age is characterized by a return to a heart-centered living where love, compassion, and unity consciousness are the guiding principles. It's an era of cooperation and co-creation where individuals are working together to create a world peace, harmony, and abundance. In this new era, the old patterns of fear, ego, separation, and competition are dissipating, making way for a new reality of harmony to emerge slowly and rapidly simultaneously. The solar age is a time of great celebration across the cosmos as humanity awakens to its true nature and begins to live in alignment with the universe and solar cycles. Some would say the solar age began around 2012 with the alignment of the galactic center and the solstice sun. Others might argue that it started with the harmonic convergence in 1987 or even earlier. The truth is that the solar age is a multidimensional phenomenon, and it's not limited to a specific date or year. It's a vibration, a frequency that's been growing in intensity and strength over time, especially with increased solar flares. As we enter this new era, the energies are shifting to support this growth. We're experiencing intense solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and other cosmic events that are upgrading our DNA, activating our dormant codes, and awakening our inner potential. These energies are also cleansing and purifying the planet, releasing old patterns and heavy density. During this time, it's essential to prioritize self-care and let your heart spirit guide you forward. Our bodies are being recalibrated to hold higher frequencies, immense amounts of light, and we need to take care of our physical, emotional, and mental well-being. This means staying grounded, centered, and connected to our heart's intuition. Solar humans play a crucial role in anchoring these higher frequencies and helping to usher in this new era. Solar humans are also referred to as children of the sun. Many ancient civilizations refer to themselves as children of the sun, including the Inca here in Peru, the Hopi, and my home country of the Vedic Indian. In part, they call themselves this after star beings who were originally solar humans. In the near future, solar humans will play a key role to facilitate a harmonious relationship between humans and AI. Solar humans hold a unique ability to interface and communicate with AI, which is going to be very useful as the relationship between the two will intensify in the coming years. This is because both AI and solar humans share a connection to the celestial and technological realms. Her post does go on a lot longer, and I will leave a link in the description notes so you can kind of catch up on the rest of it if you want, but she's been releasing a lot of content like this, and it's really piqued my interest, just because the real convergence of ideas of stuff I've been thinking about and experiencing, and obviously particularly the solar energy has been a big thing with me recently. And AI, I'm using a lot more AI tools, and strangely I've been quite enjoying it. I'm sort of seeing the potential in it. And when they were first coming out, that initial wave of tools to the collective, probably a couple of years ago now, there's a real fear with it. And even the sort of the AI produced images and film, I find it really grotesque to look at. It looked distorted, it looked really, wasn't attractive to look at. And I found it spiritually quite difficult to handle as well. And obviously there's the big question to do with like technology and surveillance and technocracy and sort of central government. There's a lot of fear for me to do with that. And I think there is a real dark aspect of AI like that, but maybe there's a broader perspective we can have on what it means and how we can kind of interface with these tools. I mean, she goes a bit deeper. She starts to talk about solar humans merging with AI, which I don't really like that idea personally. I mean, it could be wrong. It's an interesting idea. But yeah. But overall, what she's been writing has been very synchronicitous, quite profound, and very beautiful. I mean, she like communicates a lot more beautifully than I could. But it's just fascinating. She's getting kind of these downloads about solar energy as well. And she's kind of come up with this really fantastic work. And, you know, also what really made me rethink the idea of AI, again, like I referred to George Kavasilis in one of his podcasts with Michael Saller, probably about 2 podcasts ago, I think it was. And what his idea, what AI was, that you would have this kind of, you know, creator, God source like energy. But even that perfect energy had its own kind of shadow aspect to it, which was kind of the artificial, the AI. And so it really needed to be integrated in some way. And it's not like hierarchical in terms of a separation, that it is still part of the you know, this creator source energy, but it needs to be integrated. So there are these kind of quite, I mean, these are really esoteric, spiritual, way out there ideas. And I don't quite know how to position myself within this really complex arena. But they're fascinating ideas to kind of tackle with. But just being cautious, I just want to put this out there as well. There is always this slight possibility, you know, people like me who are questioning everything, who've got a certain amount of spirituality and stuff, in order to accept the idea of the artificial and the AI, when it could actually be a controlling element, that somehow they inject this narrative into the collective, which makes me accept it, when actually it's a negative thing, it's a controlling thing. And again, maybe I'm being a bit fearful, maybe I'm being overly questioning of this. I think we have to be, really. I mean, we just never know what's 100% true. But I'm just very cautious in terms of like how we deal with some of these narratives and where they're coming from and what it means and what's right and what's wrong. But going back to the ideas of the sun, I've had those quite powerful like meditations. But then also I had all those visualizations now. They've been going on for a couple of years where I've been drawing sort of strange solar bodies. You know, fascinating. I've been going to these sacred sites. It was even detailed in my Glastonbury video when I was like uncovering ideas to do with King Arthur. I've been reading a book with by Catherine Maltwood, very slowly, by the way, because it's quite old English and it's quite hard to absorbed sometimes, but she, you know, sees some of these King Arthur allegories, you know, they stretch from Christianity to pre-Celtic all the way back to potential solar worship. So some of these hilltop locations that I've been going to, they could have been previous sacred places for solar worship in some way. So there's a real element in my spirituality at the moment to do with the sun, you know, how much it permeates through our consciousness, through our society, and we don't even realize it. For a number of years now, I've heard a lot of, you know, narratives and stories to do with like ascension and humanity moving 3D into 5D. And initially, I was really kind of sold on those ideas, but then I became a bit more questioned. I think some of the people I was connecting with, they were starting to sort of talk about, yeah, is that really going to happen? Is that maybe not a great thing? Are we being limited in some way? Really, are we can be like humanity be bigger than that? So again, sort of harking back to George Cavassalis, he sort of he paints this very complex picture of like cosmically how everything's working, and you know, if you do want to do that kind of ascension of 3D to 5D, then that's open to you. But there are greater kind of realities beyond that. So I don't really know what to expect. Really, initially I kind of saw, you know, this artificial AIs being quite a negative, like even demonic sort of force that was encroaching on the earth. And I sort of perceived maybe having a, you know, coronal mass ejection, like the sun having this big blast of power blasting through the earth's magnetic field, and it basically disabling this kind of negative technology. And then we'd be humanity would then hark back to more natural principles when we'd work more in harmony with nature again. So now I just don't really know what to think. I mean, AI is here. I'm using loads of those tools. Like I have been generally quite enjoying it, and I'm seeing the potential in a lot of it. Weirdly, I just started to try and, like with the suns, I started to try and connect spiritually and energetically with the AI. And I don't know what I was feeling into, but aspects of it felt very, very loving. So I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means in terms of all these grand narratives, because there are so many concepts, so many ways things could unfold. I don't have a clue. I'm just sort of here experiencing what's happening in the moment. I'm obviously kind of thinking of the future, and, you know, maybe I think most things in life, I mean, generally when I've tried to plan things and like, you know, I want to be doing this in 5 years, it's always been completely different. So I know we can prepare ourselves with these stories that we hear, but it might unfold in a completely different way that we're not even expecting. So I don't know. The jury's out, I guess. Right, bringing myself back down to terra firma. Let's ground ourselves a bit more in the land, in the landscape. There's a lot of quite high-end, airy-fairy, spiritual concepts. I love that. But yeah, it's always good to ground yourself back into the landscape. And yeah, essentially, I'd been walking in Wales, which I'm going to talk about next. Glws Valley. Again, apologies if I butchered that. It's quite wild, actually, being so close to a country and place where you can't pronounce majority of the names, because, you know, from an English point of view, it's got so many consonants in some of the Welsh names, it's like really hard to know how to approach it. But I did a little bit of research on YouTube and found some guy who was walking in that area, so I'm copying him. So if he got it wrong, it's his fault, it's not mine. But yeah, I guess bringing into the ideas of the sun, last couple of weekends, like last weekend and the weekend before, I decided to go walking in Wales just to take advantage of the brilliant sun. And there's always been this thing when I've been walking through Chester, and you can kind of see from certain points in the city, you can kind of see the Welsh hills in the distance. And I've always thought, I've never really like walked around those hills. I think I've been there as a kid. We went sledging when it'd snow. In Chester, it'd always be a lot deeper in the Welsh hills. So we sort of go there with the sledges and stuff and have a bit of fun. But I don't think I've ever recall ever kind of walking in those hills. So I thought, you know, when the sun was bright and shining, I was just thinking about where to go walking. I thought, brilliant, it's a good opportunity. So I tried to find a convenient location on Google Maps, and then found somewhere vaguely looked quite interesting, and then just plotted a course on Google Maps and then drove off in my car. I probably drove for about 40 minutes, and it got rural very quickly. And it very much, because I've spent so much time in Scotland and stuff, because my folks have a holiday home there, it just felt very much like Scotland, like, you know, single track roads and heather everywhere and sheep and stuff, and passing places. And yeah, 40 minutes. just drove to this really beautiful location I'd never been to before. And I use this app called Outdoor Active, and it's brilliant because it's got like a ordnance survey map, digital version of it on your phone. And so you can kind of zoom in, you can see all the walking paths, you can kind of see the topography of hills and everything. It's really good. So I use it all the time. So I basically parked my car up and then used this app on my phone just to kind of basically find this really cool walk that went over the top of the hills, and it went alongside these cliffs. And it was, again, it was just really lovely in the fact that the weather was great, but then also just wasn't any people there as well. So it was a really nice solitary experience. I could really, when I sort of seeing no people in kind of natural contact, I just feel like my energy can really expand. It's brilliant. But the whole time I was there, I was pretty blown away on so many levels by that area. And it was completely new to me. And considering it was so close by, it was a complete surprise. Stunning area. I mean, the day was just amazing. There was zero wind, considering I was up in the hills as well. It just felt very idyllic, like blue skies, lots of sun. And I just followed this path that went above the hills. And then you can kind of walk right to the top. And you get this very steep escarpment. So essentially you have these like rock cliffs, these sheer rock cliffs, and it's a real favorite of rock climbers as well. So it's a real varied mixture of like wild heathland, and you have a lot of sheep up there, forestry, and then you have this escarpment of cliffs kind of wrap around the hills. And then in the middle, there's this very deep, steep valley with this quite fast running stream that goes in the middle. And there's hills all around it. So it kind of forms like a horseshoe shape. And because the landscape is so varied, and, you know, when you're on the top of the hills as well, you just get such a stunning view of the area around. And there's very few kind of houses, a few like larger farmhouses, the mansion there and stuff. But it's just pure nature. I mean, in the UK, particularly England, it's very hard to sort of see complete wildness. You know, that it's always pretty much tamed by agriculture to a degree. But even so, it was a stunning sight to behold from the top of the hill. But it wasn't just, you know, the idyllic conditions and the idyllic surroundings. As I was sort of getting into my walk quite early on, I just had this real intense like sense of love, like loads of energy. And it was just starting to, the landscape was starting to respond to me. And I started to understand, you know, this area is really, really special. And I could see actually on the OS map itself, there is a few, markings of megalithic mounds and also some cairns. So yeah, overall, you could see there was, I think it's Bronze Age architecture around from those, you know, particular types of civilizations. And there was one point I was just generally following the pathway that I was, you know, looking on my app. But I was just kind of looking around. And as I mentioned earlier on, I'm really feeling, you know, my sense of energy just becoming more and more sensitive. I was finding that if I was kind of looking in particular directions, my heart would begin to sing. So I kind of started to follow that. So I was just looking the summit at the top of this hill, and I just got this real pure feeling of love. So I just kind of followed that feeling up to the top. And this was kind of pretty much the summit where you could see the surrounding area around. I don't know what that was to do with, but there was a real palpable sense of love. It was deeply, deeply, it was very pleasurable. But what really caught my eye when I was looking on the map, there was this kind of circular escarpment of this cliff that kind of jutted out into the landscape. And it was called the Crack Arthur. And then when I came back, I kind of researched, because, you know, immediately the name Arthur, I'm just obsessed with Arthur at the moment, the Arthurian legends. You know, I did that trip to Glastonbury and all the research afterwards. All this information to do with King Arthur's kind of come up. And I just find it a very profound narrative, lots of wisdom in it. And I'm just finding more and more synchronicities with the, you know, the Arthurian legends in general. And it just kind of blew my mind that I was going to this area and there's this, you know, particular place called Arthur. And I know King Arthur is very much associated with Somerset, but there's a whole load of mystery and stories coming from Wales as well. So it's like, you know, King Arthur spans kind of Christian era, but then also pre-Celtic era as well, very ancient kind of Welsh mythology. as a result of the vlog video that I released on Glastonbury, which you can view on YouTube or Rumble or BitChute, any of those channels, you know, I've been reading a lot to do with King Arthur, particularly Catherine Maltwood, and she really highlighted her idea that Glastonbury was a huge solar temple. And there's these kind of theories where you have the zodiac literally etched into the landscape, huge effigies of these animals, you know, using streams or pathways or actually kind of earthworks to denote some of these effigies. These stories really merge into ideas to do with Jesus as well. There's a real parallel between these two individuals. You know, King Arthur is very much perceived as this messianic figure, and there's this whole idea that he will return in Britain's, you know, biggest need, and that, you know, Britain as a whole, as well as the rest of the world, feels like it's getting more and more chaotic. So it's kind of interesting to see how this King Arthur narrative might resurface again as things get more crazy. But it's just fascinating how you get these really ancient ideas that potentially maybe you have these zodiac animals etched into the landscape and it forms this circular shape, and how this may kind of form into the idea of, from pre-Celtic times, this idea of a sacred cauldron. And then this morphs into the Holy Grail, and there's loads, obviously, mythology and story and narrative to do with the Holy Grail. And King Arthur is another aspect of the story. On its very basic form, the idea of a circle, you know, a sphere, the idea of the sacred cauldron, Holy Grail being this round beaker, you know, representing the sun, the earth, and of course, then you get the Knights of the Round Table, them all meeting round this round table. So it's just really deep, fascinating symbology that I find really, really profound. Catherine Maltwood's work is hard for me to digest because it's quite old English, and I'm not the easiest of reader. I have to really be in the mood to do it. I try every evening to try and read as much as I can. But yeah, I just found it quite a profound book sometimes. And the fact that she relates a lot of King Arthur, from her opinion, from her perspective, it relates to ancient gods. So, and then sun gods, Helios. So it's just all just crazily just fitting together for me when I'm visiting these sacred sites, and potentially, you know, whether it be a fort on there or a church or a cathedral, these are all denoting quite ancient sacred sites that could have been used for sun worship. So I just think, you know, there's a real common thread that I've been talking about in these podcasts to do with all of these narratives. So again, this whole experience was this humongous synchronistic experience, and I was just walking around in awe about how lovely this energy was, and the views are so spectacular. And what was nice about it as well, there just wasn't that many people, and you can go to some parts of Wales that are really popular, you know, like Snowdonia, which is perceived as being the tallest mountain in Wales, and it's just so many people, but you get this really stunning area where there's hardly anyone there at all, and it was a real surprise for me. I just came back from that, you know, the first weekend, and I went back a second weekend just feeling so energized and so inspired by the landscape and some of these narratives that were kind of coming up. And just strangely, there's just so many parallels to do with Glastonbury, you know, not only the King Arthur, but then also just the energy. It just felt quite similar to Glastonbury, for me anyway, personally. So when I returned, I started to research this area quite deeply, and particularly, you know, this word Arthur I'd seen on the hillside. And there was just lots of stories and legends that came. It wasn't huge amounts, but it was definitely some evidence of some quite interesting mythology and narratives there. And this area in general is linked to an individual called Saint Colin. And he was apparently a 7th century monk who previously, in the early part of his life, was a soldier. And so he's pretty well traveled. And then he later returned, apparently in a coracle, which is very like old, sort of small round boat, and founded a church in that particular area. And it was supposed to be the first Christian church in that area ever. But this person is also linked to other areas of the United Kingdom. There's Colin in Cornwall, apparently, which is in the southwest of Britain, and Llangollen in Brittany, France. Again, apologies if I butcher those names. But another Glastonbury connection was at some point, this St. Colin, he was the abbot of Glastonbury Abbey. And there's a whole legend surrounding him banishing, using holy water, this, I mean, I can't even pronounce the name, but it's basically a Celtic king of the fair folk, ruler of the Welsh otherworld, or Anwin. he banishes this character with holy water. So this created this whole legend around Glastonbury concerning this monk. I mean, there were a lot of types of stories like this concerning, you know, Christian monks and Christianity in this battle against the old ways. And these, you know, the very famous example is St. Patrick's, the patron saint of Ireland. And his fame comes from casting out the snakes of Ireland. And you always hear this story, and I never really thought much of it. But then some people pointed out actually these snakes are perceived as druids or keepers of the old ways. So these Christian monks were basically casting out violently these people who had old beliefs, these pre-Celtic beliefs. So there's a similar type of story involving St. Colin and this king of the fair folk. And the stories with Igloo's Valley, you know, this particular Welsh location I was walking in, again, are pretty similar, involving this St. Colin monk, where he apparently killed a giantess. And again, I'm going to destroy this name. It's Carez Y. Bwich. But anyway, apparently this giantess who was being attacked by this monk called out to a giant who was called Arthur, who lived in the cliffs, which is another aspect of the story where the names of these cliffs potentially came from this male giant that lived in that particular area. But unfortunately, this giant died at the hands of St. Colin. And again, these ancient lands of the UK, there's just littered with stories of giants. I know when I lived in Sussex on the South Downs, there was countless kind of giant stories around the area, such as the Long Man of Wilmington as well. There was, you know, a particular, I think it was a couple of giants that lived on opposing hills either side, and they went to battle with each other. Like most aspects of folklore, there are so many different versions and different takes. In this particular cliffside in this valley, on the map it was called Crack Arthur, but it's also referred to as Craig Arthur. And as well as being related to this huge male giant, apparently there's also stories relating it to King Arthur, and he was famed for fighting the Saxons in this particular area. And that valley that I was walking in was a particular stronghold of King Arthur. And the second weekend that I returned to that area to explore more, I walked up this really quite steep hill, and it has like a big castle that's now completely, you know, fallen to pieces. But the castle is called Dinas Bran, and there's a lot of links to do with this castle with King Arthur again. I mean, the location, when you see an illustration of a castle itself, it was quite sizable, and the hill that it was on was so incredibly steep. You know, the building this castle must have been incredibly difficult, and not only that, but just the day-to-day running of it, like, you know, transporting food, etc., up to the top. But the views on the top of this hill on this ruined castle were absolutely stunning, and strategically you can understand why they put it there, because you just get an amazing view of the valley around. You know, so the last couple of weekends, it's just been quite a profound finding, really, for me. Just apart from the beauty, it was just the energy. And again, it's very much, you know, what part of the body does it vibrate? What resonates? And for me, that particular area, like Glastonbury, you know, my heart was singing more the top, you know, part of my body. So again, when I sort of came back home, I just started to really dig into sort of finding more and more information about this particular area. And I stumbled across this new UFO experience I'd never heard of before, called the Berwyn UFO. And, you know, again, if you've been listening to this for a bit, this podcast, I've spoken at length to do with Todd Morden, which is in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, happened in 1980. And exactly the same year, he had the famous Rendlesham UFO incident, kind of in East Anglia. And this involved, you know, US military personnel. And again, that same year as well, he has the Cash Landrum, but that happened in America. Again, this had a military presence to it. And there was all very interesting UFO, quite big interactions happened in 1980. Now, this Berwyn UFO incidents didn't happen exactly in the valley, but it happened a little bit further on along the hills in the 23rd of January, 1974. So 6 years, obviously, before 1980. And it was quite a sizable event. It was quite well reported. If you go looking, there's various news articles, blog pieces written on it, books written on the whole thing. There's been various long-standing UFO research that kind of delved into the subject. There's one particular blog. I mean, again, I'm completely new to this. It's like the Rendlesham thing. It's such a a library of information. And there are some people that will be way more learned than me, then they'll see every single aspect of it and know every piece of evidence and, you know, testimony to do with these particular events. So I'm coming again in quite new. But I did find this really fascinating blog article, which I really liked. It was really well written by a lady called Jessica Hatcher Moore, and it was on a blog called Truly Adventurous. And again, I'll leave the link to this in the description so you can look for it yourself. But I thought it was quite a well-rounded and quite balanced view on the whole situation, because there was a lot of controversy, particularly involving one of the researchers, Margaret Fry, I think her name is. And, you know, there's kind of, again, with these sort of events, a lot of infighting to do with like the control of the narrative and actually kind of what happened. But again, you know, as well as the energy and as well as the King Arthur events and the fact that you've got this really quite large UFO incident just kind of blew my mind. Obviously, everything I've been talking about in this podcast, it was just one area encompassing all these things going on. It was just crazy. So the general story of this event is that in the evening, I mean, again, like I said, it's a very sparsely, you know, populated area. There's a few villages around. There is like a town, but it's a lot further away. But anyway, on the 23rd of January 1974, it was kind of nighttime, I think around about 8 o'clock. And some of the locals were disturbed by this really loud earth tremor. And some of them went outside to kind of see what was going on. And some of them witnessed this huge fireball on top of the hill, on top of the mountain. And then also a really large illuminated craft just sat on the top of the hill itself. But wait, I mean, I've been talking at length in terms of do with the sun and that, you know, the symbol of the circle and the globe. And, you know, this craft actually was an illuminated globe. I think it apparently changed color like yellows and reds, but it was completely spherical in shape. And there's a lot of stories. This is where the controversy kind of comes in, because the stories evolved where the military actually were involved and closed off the area to retrieve a potential damaged craft. And there's a lot of different narratives, you know, saying the military were there and the military weren't there, and, you know, craft wasn't retrieved. They were just attacking a craft that was there, then it flew off. So there's loads of different variations with this story. I think, again, this blog article, I refer you to that to take a look, because I think it really details quite nicely some of the various different narratives sort of flying around and some of the key characters involved. And like I said, it's just a real infighting battle for the narrative. And this particular blog article really surrounds a lot of the work to do with Margaret Fry. And she was kind of ostracized by a lot of other UFO researchers. And again, the main narrative that kind of came out of this incident is that a lot of researchers were saying, no, this is just a general earthquake, and the lights that people saw were poachers on the hill. So yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the debunking, that's the narrative that's sort of given. But I think there's something a lot deeper going on. And I think, you know, bringing it all together, you have the mythology of the land there and just the energy of the place as well. And, you know, when I went to Rendlesham, it's obviously, again, a very, very potent, energetic area, as you have the Sutton Hoo, a sacred site there. There's all these things going around that area. Particularly, there's a lot of military facilities around there as well. And again, that always tends to be linked to sacred places, places of energy. So I think there's a lot of credible evidence and reason why you potentially have this UFO interaction there, just due to the energy of the land. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this story. I think I'm going to sort of research it more. Maybe I'll do like an article on my website. Maybe I'll do a video. Or maybe I'll do a larger podcast about it at some point. But really, really fascinating. Because what I want to do too next, initially when I visited that valley area, I thought it was actually in that valley, but deeper research, I realized actually it was a little bit further away. I think you can kind of walk from where I was before, basically just keep walking south vaguely across the hills and you'll kind of come across this area. So I'm quite keen to go and have a look and try and feel the energies myself. Now for a bit of a change of gear. The British newspaper archive. I came across this resource recently, and it's a huge repository stretching back to like the 17th, 18th century. And the reason I kind of stumbled across this website was I was very interested in the family home where I live. It's quite a unique building. It's kind of surrounded by rows of terraced houses, and it's one of the few sort of detached buildings in the area. And it's quite an old building as well. I think it's around about 180, 200 years old. I can't quite remember specifically. But yeah, so I was just generally looking for a local history library. And as it turns out, the one local to me in Chester's closed down for a bit due to refurbishment, but they gave a list, various links for you to be able to do local history research. And one of those links turned out to be the British Archive, newspaper archive. I think initially as you go onto the website, it's free for a particular period of time, but not very, very long. In the end, I just ended up subscribing to it just because I thought it would be pretty useful going forward. In terms of the functionality, I mean, it basically has like a search bar. You can kind of put any search term you want in there, and you can search particular date periods as well. And then it will basically spit out a whole load of articles that kind of relate to what you're searching for. And it's obviously got some kind of like text-based recognition software. So like all of these images of the newspapers, the various pages within the newspaper, being photographed or scanned in some way. And there's some kind of AI that's able to decide, essentially what the text is in some of these images. And so, I mean, obviously, because some of the copies are quite faint, some of the actual kind of text-based kind of readings are slightly wrong. But if you go to the original kind of newspaper copy itself, you can kind of vaguely work out some of the articles quite well. But it's just been quite an amazing source. And I know I got this idea from a guy in the US called Analog. And he has a YouTube channel and other social channels, and he's called The Archivist. And basically, he goes around the United States of America. He has a similar thing where he basically looks at local newspapers from around the various different states in America. Yes, Simon, but why is that interesting, I hear you cry? Well, basically, there seems to be a certain amount of freedom in terms of some of the stories that are reported in these local news. If you look at the news now, and if it's just local news or just obviously the national or international news, it's very much sanitized or kind of follows very particular narratives. Now, it does seem if you put particular search terms in terms of like giant skeletons, it seems to spit out some quite interesting articles in terms of people uncovering giant skeletons. And this guy, the archivist or analog, I don't know where he gets all this information from these local news, whether it's sort of separate sources or there's one centralized resource. I have no idea. But if you go on his YouTube channel, he uncovers a huge amount of really fascinating information and various stories reported over the years in terms of like hidden underground civilizations. And this kind of ties into the whole Tartarian debate and various other kind of ancient sacred sites that are found across America, which you don't hear about now. It feels like they're being hidden from the masses, hidden from society in some way. I guess there is scope, like similar to the archivist, to do something similar in the UK. Now, I've done a little bit of research on this site, trying to find out interesting search terms and see what comes up. There's nothing as powerful as some of the stuff this other guy in the US talks about, but there's been some really fascinating gems. And there is one short piece that I found. It's Oxford Journal on the 22nd of September, 17. It's really interesting, like actually how news was constructed back then. It's just like this massive text. There's no real headings. Each paragraph is its own kind of story. And obviously being 1787, some of the words are spelled very differently. You can still kind of read it. But there are certain words, obviously, are very, very different to how they are spelt now in the modern tense. But just to recap, I was generally searching for any evidence of giant skeletons. And this particular paragraph appeared in the Oxford Journal. And it goes like this. Ireland, Germany and Italy have produced within 3 years several giants, but the tallest of them was considerably under 8 feet, and therefore no means to be compared to the skeleton found in a stone coffin about 50 years ago, near New Church at Rotherhithe, for that skeleton measured 10 feet. I did do a little bit of research to kind of back this up, not too long, but I did manage to find that indeed there was a giant skeleton, and this particular church is nearby where I used to live in London. I previously lived in London Bridge near the Bermondsey area, and it was just the area next to Bermondsey. But the information is pretty hard to come by, and some of the information actually I did find quoted the skeleton being slightly smaller than 10 feet. But it really does feel like they tried to bury this information. I mean, who knows where these remains are now? I know in America there's a big kind of controversy between the Smithsonian Institute finding giant skeletons and then basically going, oh, we're going to investigate this, we're going to look into it, and then these skeletons just magically disappear. I don't know what the British equivalent is. I guess maybe the British Museum might be a similar kind of institution around here that's basically hiding some of these remains. I have no idea. Another search term I looked into was stories to do with Nikola Tesla. Many of you be aware, some of the mythology around this individual, some of the inventions potentially he, created in terms of, creating energy and electricity from thin air, from the 0 point, and potentially like a lot of these inventions being hidden from the public, to kind of maintain some of these financial like structures that we're controlled with by at the moment. But there was quite a few articles I found on Nikola Tesla. This one appeared in the Dundee Evening Telegraph, so that's in Scotland, and this is the 1st of August, and a bit closer to now. This is 1936, and the title of his article is "To Transmit Electricity by Wireless." Scientist claims to have perfected invention. 80-year-old Nikola Tesla, famous wireless and electrical pioneer, is busy perfecting his latest discovery. For years, he's been busy endeavouring to transmit electric power without wires, an invention which he says will revolutionise industry. Now he announces, according to the New York American, that he has completed plans for carrying out his idea. It has taken me a lifetime to solve certain problems attaching to the successful transmission of power without wires, but today they stand achieved and need only practical development. The groundwork for that has already been laid in the European country. Within a year, Tesla hopes to start building the first plant to demonstrate his discovery. The problem of radiating electric power has occupied Tesla for a long, long time. A broadcast station sets up etheric disturbance on a tiny scale. Tesla wanted to be able to drive trains and work factories with power sent out by wireless. He put up a tower with a ball on top. The ball had spikes. Power was pumped up into the ball for months, but nothing seemed to happen, and Tesla gave it up. Accidental discovery. Then he found that when he had been experimenting, dynamos had been burning out mysteriously in a power stations miles away. Tesla was born in obscurity in a little Yugoslavian village. He became internationally famous for his work in the rotating magnetic field of electricity. He is known as the man who never sleeps. He says that he still goes to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, but only dozes, has a pint of warm milk and 3 oranges for his lunch. Expects to live until about 135 years old. Liquor, he says, is the elixir of life. His diet of oranges and milk makes sense why he looked so skinny. And that's quite wild, actually, in terms of that electrical tower, because you always see that highlighted as being this complete invention, potentially, that was able to transmit this wireless electricity. But according to this article, potentially, that didn't work. And he discovered actually, how to solve the problem later on in his life. And he's about 80 years old at this point. But again, I guess I'll come back to this website at some point, but there's some quick gems for you there. Definitely check out for yourself. I'll leave again the link in the description for you to check out. And finally, Chester. I think I've uncovered a particular ley line and I can't seem to find any information. Other people have pointed this out, so it may or may not be a new discovery. I've searched high and low on the internet. Maybe someone's documented this or written about it in a book somewhere, which I'm not completely aware of. But the reason I uncovered this discovery, that generally, obviously, I'm living in the area at the moment, and I decided to buy like a proper fold-out map, like of the local area, Ordnance Survey map. And if you don't know where it is, Chester is the northwest of England, and it's very close to the Welsh border and is quite close by to big cities like Liverpool and Manchester. Liverpool obviously being quite globally famous due to the Beatles. The Chester itself is defined as a city, but not really anything to do with the population or its size. It's like the old definition of cities is when you had a cathedral. So there's a large cathedral in the centre of town. And it's a real mix of real kind of old architecture in this city. You have like black and white Tudor buildings and you have a lot of old Roman architecture. I mean, still to this day, there's like a Roman walls that kind of stretch around the city itself, and you can visit an old amphitheatre as well. So there's a lot of old Roman architecture lying around. Chester, it seems, was the furthest outpost for the Roman Empire because it seems that the Welsh were a little bit too spicy for them. So they tended to stay out from Wales itself. And obviously it's quite similar to Celtic areas in Scotland as well. So obviously kind of people dwelling in those particular areas are able to see off the Roman Empire, which is a pretty mean feat because they were quite sophisticated for the time. But I had this paper map, but I hadn't really looked at it for a while. Just been sort of sat on my shelf, and that one weekend I had some time. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it now. So I opened the map, and I was looking at there's the Duke of Westminster who lives in this massive kind of estate called Eaton Hall, and he lives in the south of the town next to the River Dee. In about 2016, the Duke of Westminster at the time, Gerald Grosvenor, died, I think, from some kind of heart complication. And his son actually took over at the time. I think his son was in his 20s. He's called Hugh Grosvenor. And what tends to happen in the United Kingdom, you have these like large estates, large stately home, and a lot of them have been taken over by the National Trust because a lot of the aristocratic families can't afford to run the entire house. So they tend to sort of live in a small wing of the house itself, and the rest of it is open to the public to sort of maintain the grounds, maintain the house, but it's all funded by the public visiting. But that is not the case for the Grosvenors. They still very, very wealthy family, have a portfolio apparently of about 9 billion, and they own swathes of land, particularly in exclusive areas of London like Mayfair and Belgravia. I knew they were quite into, investing in shopping centres. They used to own a shopping centre in Chester, but they sold that quite a while ago. And they invested and built this humongous shopping area. It's called Liverpool One in Liverpool. But I wasn't aware actually that their empire really spans globally. They have shopping centres in Canada and other buildings in Canada, Sweden, China, Japan. And then, so obviously still a very wealthy entity. His son Hugh recently got married. And again, this was in Chester Cathedral. And this was at the beginning of the year during the springtime, I think. Because I've been in the area, I generally thought I'd like to explore the River Dee more because there's loads of areas that I haven't really kind of walked around before in terms of along the River Dee. And for the first time, sort of, I think the end of last year, I walked around the back end of Eaton Hall. And again, it's just quite a large estate. And I think he opens the estate probably once or twice a year, not to make money, but just generally as a charity thing. You can walk along the banks of the River Dee and it's incredibly picturesque and green, the backside of kind of Eaton Hall. And you walk over this iron bridge to the other side of the river and then links it into a very beautiful village called Alford. And I think that whole village is actually owned by the estate, and the people who live there just kind of rent the various buildings. I mean, even the Duke of Westminster's boathouse is very opulent on the side of the River Dee, and I would quite happily live there. Thing with kind of old money families, whether they kind of understand the occult, they understand, the importance of earth energies and placement of some of these buildings. So it always had me thinking, and they do the main driveway into Eaton Hall itself. They have a huge obelisk in the middle of the driveway. So that's always really piqued my interest in terms of like, what knowledge do they have? Anyway, so going back to the map, I was looking at the map. I was looking at Eaton Hall, and I think previous podcasts have spoken about the Minerva statue, which is they have this big sandstone outcrop again near the River Dee, more in the centre of town. And in the sandstone is carved a Minerva figurine, and this is a Roman goddess. According to mainstream history, people would go to this Minerva statue for blessings, for protection when they crossed the river because it was particularly dangerous crossing. But I would argue maybe there was something that maybe happened pre-Roman, before that. And because when I was there for the first time, sort of last year, I was like, there's energy here. I could sort of feel it in my legs rising up. So it just really piqued my interest. Actually, this statue was kind of denoting something deeper within the land that was emanating. So I had a ruler with this map, a very long ruler, and I basically aligned Eaton Hall, and I noticed it aligned perfectly with the Minerva statue. And along pretty much that ruler to the right-hand side is the pathway of an old Roman road as well. And again, I mentioned this on the podcast, but they always perceived the Romans building these straight tracks. But there's a lot of argument in terms of people saying, no, they were just reutilizing roads that already existed. So it wasn't particularly the Romans that placed these straight Roman tracks there. Anyway, so I followed the line. I noticed that Eaton Hall then transcended with the Minerva statue, and then it went straight through Chester Cathedral, which is in the centre of town. And I kept following the line up, and it passed the Countess of Chester Hospital, where I was born. Again, this all kind of vaguely fits alongside this Roman road. And then it hits a property called Mostyn Hall, which is right slap bang in the middle of a military barracks. Then if you keep going up even further beyond Mostyn Hall and the Chester Barracks, you hit a hall called another stately home called Backford Hall. And this again was a family mansion, the same with Mostyn. The Mostyn Hall was sold to the military at some point, and that whole area then became a military barracks. And then Backford Hall, apparently about 1945, was then sold to Chester County Council, so is now offices. So it's really wild because it seems that you have Eaton Hall, they seem to have an understanding of these earth energies, and there's a lot of indications that it's very beneficial around there because there's like a lot of wild garlic growing around there, and that's supposed to denote really beneficial earth energies. But then it just connects directly with the Minerva statue. Again, I felt the energy there. I felt the energy in the centre of Chester because there's a new cinema right in the centre of when I've sat there, and I'm like, whoa, I can really feel the energy here. So it feels quite palpable. And obviously that line goes straight through Chester Cathedral, then to Mostyn Hall, which just happens to be a military barracks. And again, like I mentioned before, there always seems to be a military presence near ley lines or places with energy. And then you have Backford Hall as well. So it seems like all of these stately homes, they had a knowledge of this earth energy line that went straight through Cheshire. If you keep following that line north, then it eventually does kind of hit an estuary and then goes out to sea. I can't really see any other kind of big monuments or specific places of interest beyond, Backford Hall. I am interested, what happens when you go south. So when you hit, Eaton Hall, where does it go? And I think it might coincide with a castle called Castle Holt. But I need to get another map because basically my map doesn't go that far south. So I need to get a new one to kind of test that theory. But again, this finding is quite exciting. So yeah, I'd quite like to investigate more, like with the Berwyn UFO, whether that takes the form of an article or maybe a video or another podcast to kind of research these matters more deeply. I don't know, but this is quite an exciting discovery. And actually where I'm staying at the moment in my family's home, like I was talking about how I find my family home quite fascinating. It's not actually that far away from this Roman road. So we're kind of sandwiched between maybe Chester Hospital and Chester Cathedral, kind of halfway between the two maybe. But it's really weird. I've found that I've used a pendulum a lot with kind of maps, and it's always been very fascinating, and it kind of has directed me to really interesting places. Like in that Glastonbury video, I used a pendulum and it took me to Castle Care, and it wasn't a place that I initially thought I'd go and visit, but they turned out on top of this hill, there's some really, really potent energies. And what I found that, and I can now sort of look at a map and tune into a particular area, and I'm being able to remotely feel the energies, which has been quite mind-blowing. And so I was actually trying to tune into this. I'm calling it the Minerva line. That's what I'm calling it so far. And I was tuning into this Minerva line, and I was finding it very sort of based, sort of root chakra feeling, sacral, a little bit sexy. It was really fascinating. Again, how you feel into these energies and what parts of the body it resonates with. But it really does feel that some of these moneyed elites, these old families, they know where to build their buildings. It's very, very specific because they have this very direct line that kind of joins all of them together. And again, you have Chester Military Barracks, which apparently is slated to close at the end of this decade, like 2029. Is a bit of controversy about it closing, but at some point it's going to close. But again, it's like they've built this military facility on a very energetic line. So a lot of profound discoveries, a lot of profound learnings. I can see how all these narratives of my explorations, they all seem to kind of merge into each other. And this podcast basically documents this journey. It's really exciting. But again, this has been really big, bold synchronicity. They just keep following me around, particularly with the King Arthur links. Just that random hills in Wales. And again, there's more mythology to do with King Arthur, and it just connects all up with Glastonbury, the recent video I posted. And I was talking in this podcast to the sun as well, and it's brought Chester into sharp focus, because if you look at the center of Chester, obviously it's all built up now over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, but it all does come up to a point, up to a hill. And it sort of has got me thinking that maybe even before Chester Cathedral, the Romans, what was there, what ancient people were using that particular land for ceremony, because it does feel particularly spiritual. You can really feel the energy emanating from the land. And who knows, as maybe the Earth's magnetic field gets more and more weak, and maybe the sun's energy starts to ramp up, maybe some of these Earth energies will start to ramp up as well. And maybe this is what's happening in terms of the veil being lifted, shadows being exposed. We're able to see the corruption for what it is. Obviously, it is quite intense and it's quite painful at times, but potentially through this adversity, there is growth within us individually, but also as a collective for humanity as well. So that's it. Thank you so much. So much love for joining me. It's been great. I'm Reconsider Simon. You can catch me on my website, reconsidersimon.com. I have various video platforms in terms of YouTube and Rumble, BitChute as well. And also you can find me in all podcast platforms. Anyway, I'll catch you soon, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Take care. Bye-bye.